here at Small Business Solver is scaling a small business and how to do it. And the reason that it's so important really is that if you're not growing, you're shrinking. And I remember someone told me that if you're not learning, you're shrinking as well. So this is something that we think is very, very important, is that staying ahead of the competition, constantly gathering feedback, and then constantly looking for ways to grow. At the same time, there are many solopreneurs, entrepreneurs who are satisfied with just their own business, not hiring people, not considering growing. But really, if you are looking at doing a family empire, scaling your small business is critical. And we have strategies to do that, and we're going to walk through a process so that today you can look at your own business and see how to do this in the least amount of risk possible, but also the most strategic way possible. So scaling a small business. So what to expect, we're going to figure out what we have today. Then we're going to focus on our core competencies, because those are things that we always have to keep within our own business. So outsourcing technology might be less of a consideration for us. Hiring or figuring out how we actually keep that information within our own organization becomes very critical. Then we look at bottlenecks, and that helps us prioritize where we're scaling up and where we need to scale up. And then we start turning to the various ways that we can. So there's outsourcing, there's hiring, and then there's technology options. Of course, there's also going to be a supply chain enhancement, so efficiency, and that starts with process mapping. And that's actually what we do in today's exercise, is we're going to leverage a tool called process mapping. So what do you have today? What you need to do is process map it. And that's what this beautiful image you see is doing, is it's looking at an entire service and it's figuring out what activity happens in what order. And what you're going to notice is that for your own business and for every business, they have processes. In fact, if you're scaling up a business, the most important thing is to realize where there's consistency or where things have to happen in certain orders. It's really interesting. I met a company called Brooklyn Bagels, and their whole key is that they have 20 locations. They're a franchise bagel shop, and they said the big challenge is it's hard to actually compete against a mom and pop shop because they're going to be so focused and they're really great at what they do, but it's scaling up and it's keeping that consistency and understanding the processes that really allow you to grow. So your first phase here is the process map. If we can stick with me here, basically in this instance, let's say it's a market research company. So that's the example. It's a strict service. That's great. And the market research company, what do they do? Well, the first thing that they do is they have to get clients. So they have a proposal that they send out. And after every proposal, then, well, not everyone, but hopefully as many as possible, they then have a signed contract. So activity 1, activity 2. What happens after that is the onboarding. So they'd have to figure out exactly what research project they're doing for their clients. After that, it's supposed to go up to data gathering, and then they actually have to find the information that they said that they were going to get. Then they do the analysis of it. Then they do a report. They get the feedback. They do a final presentation, and then they invoice. So this could be a typical market research flow. And you want to do for your own business, whatever it is, what's the flow? You can do this with everything from, selling towels to it could be manufacturing a hat. It could be custom purses. It could be custom jewelry. It could be butter tarts. So hair salons, definitely. You come in, you sit down, or maybe get your hair washed, then you get your hair cut. So there's process flows that happen. Once you have your process in place, that's when we can scale it up. The first thing that we do prior to scaling up is we have to figure out what we can't get rid of. So these are the things that we have to keep in-house. And this is where we identify our core competency. So in this case, the silly diagram that I have here is supposed to say that for the market research company, their competitive advantage or their core competency is the analysis. So we figured out that the analysis is the key part that is important for the market research company. So what can they actually outsource? Well, anything that's a bottleneck. And what they identified was that their biggest bottleneck is the data gathering. So if you've ever done market research yourself, and as an entrepreneur, we've probably done that sometime, we know that when we're trying to get feedback and we're trying to do interviews or surveys and things like that, it takes sometimes a long time to get enough feedback back. So the data gathering can be a huge bottleneck, definitely for a research firm. So they identified that that's a bottleneck. The other things that are things that take time and maybe they just aren't timely in it is invoicing. And many different reasons. Maybe you just invoice at the end of a time period, or maybe you're so busy in doing the work that you don't think about invoicing. But anyway, that seems to be something that they're not doing. And then the proposal writing. Again, if you're doing all the analysis and all this other stuff, maybe the proposal writing is something that didn't work. So you see, I put it in the red being the severe bottleneck versus other potentials. And none of the bottlenecks in this case we've identified as the analysis, because the analysis is our core competency, and those are not necessarily going to be the ones that we have to outsource or get technology for. That's something that we'd probably be hiring for. So now that we've done our process map, we've figured out our core competency of what really has to be us as entrepreneurs probably at the get-go until we hire. Then we start looking at where our bottlenecks, and we've identified them here. Then once we know where we need to scale up and where our bottlenecks are, we start looking at the various ways to fill that and to solve that. And going backwards on this, number 1 or 3 is technology. And what's amazing about technology is, of course, it's getting bigger and better all the time. So there's more and more ways that technology can actually help your process, make it more efficient, take work off of you. Great. And then the other 2 are kind of different sides of the same coin. So you have hire someone or you have outsource. And so outsource to a specialist. And we're going to dig into each of these. So outsourcing. This is basically when you don't need someone full-time for whatever the role is. So definitely the invoicing, you probably don't need someone to invoice all the time unless you're at a certain size, then you'd have your accounting department. Or it could be sometimes that you need someone who's specialized. So again, maybe the accounting side of things. It's when you don't want to manage individuals, so you don't want to have to micromanage them, train them, lead them, integrate them as much as possible. You want to minimize that side. And so by getting someone who's already a specialist and does this for other companies, you can minimize your management time. Or it could have odd shifts. So if it's just different timing outside of your normal hourly, maybe you actually want to outsource overseas. So outsourcing, these are some of the reasons why you'd want to do it. And then we can compare this then to hiring. So when you're hiring someone, it's because the full-time position is actually justified, because we have enough work that it actually starts to make more sense to hire. And our work is consistent enough that it makes sense to hire. So if we're outsourcing on a contract, or if we actually find a professional for a certain role, well, it could be for seasonality. That's when you want to go that way. Versus hiring full-time is because if we're looking at all the hours throughout an entire year of how much work needs to be done, the hiring could actually be more cost-effective, or you need to actually have them up to a certain skill. There's also long-term benefits because you have the employee within your company. They actually grow with you, and maybe they actually add additional ideas, and they're more engaged with you, so they're going to be even more helpful maybe in areas you didn't even think about. And there could be a high probability of retention if you're fully engaged with them, as well as the upside of other opportunities. So 2, and the last one is going to be the technology. So we talked quickly about the fact that this is evolving. There's new applications. It's more widely accepted. Customers research heavily, so they're using internet heavily prior to actually buying. So why not use technology to help them through the process once they have bought from you? And then the final thing, consumers can self-serve. One of the neatest things that Royal Caribbean did, they were the leaders in this, was actually allowing people who came onto their cruises to book their own excursions prior to even coming onto the cruise boat. Before Royal Caribbean did that, everyone would actually have to go on a cruise boat, and if you wanted to buy an excursion, you had to go up for long hours and these long lineups to actually get to the front desk and book your excursions one by one. Whereas you can now, in all cruise boats, book your excursions in advance. And they've shown that not only is that better for the consumers because they self-serve, the consumers are more educated, they're more satisfied, and actually their excursion sales went up. No kidding. So technology can be really helpful when we overlay that. So now that we know the main places that we can or how we can solve, and we know where we want to solve our bottlenecks and our growth problems, how do we overlap that? So the data gathering. This is definitely a huge bottleneck. A solution for the market research company would be to outsource that. I mean, let's say we need research in London, Ontario. Let's say we need research in Saskatoon. Wherever we need it, we could actually outsource for that specific role. Especially for something like that, you might just get students or summer jobs or something that's going to be more of a short-term solution so that you don't have to pay them throughout the year for something that you only have a specific engagement for. Maybe, and you don't have to, but maybe you'd consider starting to outsource your invoicing, especially if it's something that you're not doing well yourself. And then the last thing here is proposal writing. Again, maybe you start using templates or boilerplates or to outsource that. Maybe the first person you hire is actually a salesperson to focus on the proposals. So this helps you by seeing where your gaps are in terms of helping you grow your business. So the fact that we've done one example, I wanted to show a different example of how the exact same process could work. So the last one was strictly a service. So this example is strictly a product. And let's say we're selling custom tables. So we receive a custom order. Great, it comes in and they want this type of table. It has to be this wide, this long, this color, this type of wood, things like that. Great. Then what we do is we take that custom order and we send the customer a design. Well, we probably have a contract in here somewhere. We send them the design. And then we have their approval, so we now get the materials, and then we manufacture it, and then it's going to be an oddly shaped table because it's a custom table, so now we have to ship it to the customer with packaging and making sure that it gets there safely, because there's not a chance we want an expensive custom table with all these expensive materials to get damaged on the way to the customer. And then the invoice. So you can see the first thing, it's just a process map. We can see that. The next thing is to understand what our core competency is. So as the company, our core competency is probably the design and most likely the manufacturing. Maybe not both of these, but definitely the design and probably the manufacturing. Then the next thing we have to worry about are our bottlenecks. So the shipping to the customer is probably something really important. It's not our core competency. It's not something we're necessarily good at. And it could be something that could go dramatically wrong. So we definitely want to have a partner who specializes in large object shipping, something that's highly fragile, making sure that it gets there safely. So that would be a strategic maybe partnership we build with another company. Materials, again, the design and manufacturing, so the product itself, is super important. We probably don't want to spend a ton of time on the material side, so this might be something that we hire for or we're looking at outsourcing in some way, shape, or form. And then the custom order. Well, we don't want to be sitting there taking all the orders, but we probably have to validate them, but maybe leveraging technology for an order form to actually streamline that and help the customer educate themselves and then do some self-serve. So there are, once you do the process map, there's some really creative ways to identify what you want to keep, what could be outsourced, what could be hired for, what could have technology overlaying it. Focus on the bottlenecks, and that's really what we need to do today to scale up our business and make some of those first baby steps to growing our family and buyers. So we figured out what we have today. That was the process mapping. We identified what was our core. So what did we or should we still be responsible for? Then we find our bottlenecks and we start to strategize the various ways that we can fill that. Outsourcing, hiring, technology. I also spoke quickly about partnerships. But there are other opportunities out there to help scale your small business. And with that in mind, I'm going to jump back in and see if there's any questions and stop our recording.